The fluorescent lights hummed their electric drone above the polished floors of Sacred Heart's ICU at 3 in the morning. Danielle Ross moved through the night shift like a shadow, invisible by design, her badge clipped to scrubs that had been washed so many times the navy blue had faded to the color of denim left in the sun. 6 months she'd been here at the Houston hospital, 6 months of night shifts and silent competence, and no one knew her name beyond the quiet one from the float pool. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the coffee cup in the break room. The trembling came without warning these days, a leftover from another life, another place. The diesel generator outside hummed to life, and her fingers jerked. Coffee sloshed across the white ceramic. She set the cup down carefully, pressed her palm flat against the counter, and waited for her pulse to slow. Muscle memory wanted to catalog the threat. Nothing here was a threat. Nothing here was real enough to hurt her. The ICU sprawled beyond the break room like a cathedral of fluorescent white and beeping monitors. 16 beds arranged in a horseshoe. Most occupied. The night shift ran on the kind of quiet that only hospitals possessed, the soft whisper of ventilators, the rhythm of cardiac monitors, the occasional murmur of a patient in semi-consciousness. Danielle moved between the beds with efficient silence, checking full lines, reading telemetry strips, adjusting medication drips. A 64-year-old post-op cardiac patient in bed 4. A 38-year-old with sepsis in bed 7. A teenager with a traumatic brain injury in bed 11, her mother sleeping in the chair beside her, one hand reaching across the bed rail. Dr. Hargrove appeared at the nurse's station as Danielle was charting vitals on the monitor. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way that came from expensive gym memberships and inherited confidence. His white coat carried the weight of a surgeon's arrogance, not earned through long nights in trauma bays, but inherited through the kind of family connections that got a man a cardiac surgery fellowship at 32. He tapped his pen against a clipboard, the rhythm deliberate. Waiting for her to notice him. She didn't look up from the screen. "How long you planning to last, sweetheart?" His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who'd never experienced consequence. The other nurses, Jennifer, Marcus's friend from high school, now a BSN, and Tommy, the night charge nurse with 15 years of combat zone medical training he never mentioned, looked away simultaneously. The universal gesture of people who'd learned not to watch. Danielle's fingers moved across the keyboard. Her voice came out soft, measured, the voice of someone who'd learned that silence was armor. "Patient vitals are stable, doctor. All drips running according to protocol. I asked you a question." His pen tapped faster. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of a man unused to being ignored. She finished typing the note. Saved. Closed the application. Then she turned to face him, and her eyes were the color of winter Atlantic, flat and empty of apology. She'd learned that look in a field hospital where people screamed and there was nothing to say that would change anything. "I plan to stay as long as the patients need me, doctor." His jaw clenched. He wanted a reaction, a flinch, a defensive edge, something to confirm that his rank and title and Rolex watch meant something. She gave him nothing. She'd already learned that lesson too. Show them your scars and they use the scars against you. Show them your fear and they weaponize the fear. Show them nothing and eventually they moved on to easier targets. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "We'll see." He turned and walked toward the physician's call room, his footsteps sharp against the tile like accusations. Danielle's hand brushed the inside of her scrub pocket where she kept a small photo, worn at the edges from being touched so many times. Her son Marcus. Marine dress blues. The uniform crisp and pressed, his shoulders back, his jaw set with the expression she recognized because it was her own expression, the look of someone who'd just made a decision that would change everything. The photo was 3 years old. He'd been at Lausanne when he wrote to her that he'd re-enlisted. She'd read the letter in a strip mall parking lot in Phoenix where she'd been working retail to avoid hospitals and the memories hospitals contained. The night deepened into that strange hour that wasn't quite morning, wasn't quite night. 4:37 a.m. The worst hour. The hour when patients coded most often, when the body decided it was too tired to keep fighting. Danielle moved through her rounds with the methodical precision that came from muscle memory, the kind that lived in her hands and spine and breath, the kind that never left no matter how hard you tried to leave it behind. She was checking the foresight on the post-op patient in Bedford when the radio at the nurse's station crackled to life. Not the hospital overhead system. The emergency dispatch radio that sat next to the charge nurse's computer. Static burst first, then a voice, controlled, professional, emergency operations center calm. Sacred Heart ICU, this is Houston Air Operations. Tommy reached for the radio immediately. Sacred Heart receiving. Go ahead, Air Ops. Medevac inbound. Marine Sergeant Major, catastrophic injuries, direct from Tikrit, Iraq. Combat Zone Trauma Protocol. Patient was exposed to blast fragmentation, multiple penetrating wounds to the thoracic cavity, possible tension pneumothorax, blood loss estimated at 3 liters prior to transport. ETA 12 minutes. Prepping for immediate intervention. The ICU shifted. Changed. What had been a quiet night became the quiet before impact. Jennifer moved toward the trauma bay, already mentally cataloging equipment. Tommy was already on the phone with the attending physician who lived 30 minutes from the hospital. Danielle finished the forecheck and stood very still. Sergeant Major David Kellerman. She knew that name the way a person knows their own heartbeat, essential, constant, a thing you don't think about until you realize it might stop. Kellerman was Marcus's commanding officer. Kellerman was the reason her son wore the uniform she'd spent 18 years trying not to let him wear. He was the one who'd written the letter. The letter she'd found on Marcus's desk 3 years ago when she was visiting him at Camp Leshan. She'd read it once and never read it again. Senior Officer Ross, your son demonstrates the qualities that make Marines. If he continues on this trajectory, he will be remembered for his service. I'm honored to lead him. That letter had 3 signatures. One of them was Kellerman's. Danielle. Tommy's voice cut through the noise in her head. We need you in Trauma 1. Get the Level 1 warmer set up, get 2 units of O-negative type and cross, and pull the crash cart closer. Move fast. She moved. Her hands were steady now, the trembling was gone, burned away by muscle memory that recognized emergency the way prey animals recognize predators. The way her body recognized a threat that demanded response. She'd spent 6 months trying to be quiet. Trying to be invisible. Trying to be a person who worked night shift in a hospital without remembering that she'd worked night shift in a field hospital, without remembering the smell of diesel fuel and blood and the particular screaming that came from people who'd been hit by explosives. The trauma bay doors were already opening. The equipment was moving into position like a choreographed dance, one she'd performed in a hospital 8,000 miles away under mortar fire and dust storms and the constant awareness that one mistake meant someone's son wouldn't come home. The helicopter was audible now, the rotor wash rattling windows, that unmistakable thump-thump-thump that every combat veteran heard in their bones and felt in their blood. Danielle pulled the Level 1 rapid infuser into position, checked the warmer, verified the units of blood. Around her, the hospital was waking up. Dr. Hargrove appeared in the trauma bay with 2 surgical residents trailing behind him, all of them moving with the confidence of people who'd trained for this but never actually done it. The medevac team was coming down fast, a UH-60 Black Hawk with Marine combat camera written across its fuselage, the bird descending toward the pad on the roof with the kind of precision that came from pilots who'd done this in desert heat while taking fire. Danielle positioned the crash cart, checked the defibrillator pads, made sure the suction equipment was functioning. Around her, the machinery of emergency medicine hummed and whirred and prepared. In her head, she was somewhere else. In a field hospital in Tikrit with the walls shaking from explosions that came too close, with hands that moved on their own, with the knowledge that everything depended on the next few minutes. The radio crackled again. Sacred Heart, patient is critical but stable. Left-sided tension pneumothorax with compromised airway. We performed field needle decompression at the scene. BP 88/52 and dropping. Heart rate 132. Respiratory distress evident. Patient is conscious. Patient is asking for his Marines. Danielle's hand stilled for just a moment. Long enough for her to feel the weight of the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the 1st Marine Division insignia, the last thing connecting her to the woman who used to save lives instead of hiding from them. She'd sewn it into the lining 6 months ago when she took this job, when she decided that if she couldn't escape what she'd been, at least she could keep it where no one else could see it. The elevator doors opened at the far end of the ICU. The medevac team was coming down, moving fast, the patient on the stretcher already looking wrong in a way that only blast injuries looked wrong, the way his body was positioned, the way his breathing was shallow and rapid, the way his eyes moved across the room and found hers for just a second. Recognition. She was standing closest to the stretcher. She was positioned where he could see her. And in that moment, less than a second, she saw him register her face. Saw his eyes narrow in the confusion that came from recognition meeting impossibility. It wasn't a request. It was a command that came from muscle memory speaking through her body before her mind could stop it. Get him to Trauma 1 now. The staff meeting started at 7 o'clock sharp Tuesday morning, the conference room already thick with coffee steam and the smell of stale bagels. Dr. Pierce Hargrove sat at the head of the mahogany table, his chair tilted back with the kind of casual arrogance that comes from 23 years of never being questioned. Danielle sat in the 3rd row, spine straight, hands folded on the laminate in front of her. She had learned in the Navy that invisibility was a survival tool. Blend in. Don't draw attention. Don't let them see the calluses on your palms or the way your eyes track exit routes. Hargrove glanced around the room, coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips. His smile was the smile of a man who owned the space he occupied. So we've got our new night shift nurse. What's your name again, sweetheart? His voice had the texture of a man used to being answered immediately, used to women smiling when he called them the diminishing name. Danielle kept her voice level. Ross. Right. Ross. He set the mug down with deliberate slowness. I'll make it interesting. I'm giving her a week. Maybe 8 days if she's tenacious, but honestly. He looked at the assembled residents and nurses like he was sharing an inside joke with old friends. You can see it in the eyes. The ones who think they can handle trauma but fold the first time the blood hits the floor. The ones who took this job because they watched Grey's Anatomy and thought it was glamorous. Laughter rippled through the room like a wave. It wasn't mean laughter. It was the laughter of people reassured that their hierarchy was intact. $20 says Ross here quits within a week. Anyone want the other side of that bet? Danielle felt something cold move through her chest, the same feeling she'd had before the mortar landed 50 meters from the field hospital in Tikrit. She took one measured breath. One single breath that lasted for seconds going in and 6 seconds coming out. A tear formed at the corner of her left eye, not from shame, but from the precise pressure of holding her body in a shape that looked like compliance. She wiped it without breaking eye contact with Hargrove. When she spoke, her voice was steady as a held rifle. I've handled worse than you know, Doctor. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of agreement, but the unsettled quiet of a social hierarchy shifting an inch. Hargrove's smile hardened. He leaned forward, all pretense of humor gone. We'll see, sweetheart. We'll see. Thursday afternoon came gray and humid, the kind of Houston day where the air tasted like metal. The cafeteria was crowded during the lunch rush, nurses in blue scrubs, residents in their white coats, administrative staff in business casual. Danielle carried Sergeant Major Kellerman's chart toward the table where Hargrove sat reviewing something on his phone, his lunch untouched beside him. 2 days the Marine had been in the hospital. 2 days of her watching his cardiac output drop incrementally with each 4-hour nursing assessment. The data was in her hands, written in the precise language of numbers and trends that doctors were supposed to care about. Doctor, his cardiac output is dropping. Respiratory compliance is, she extended the chart toward him, keeping her voice professional, clinical. No emotion. No urgency that he could mock. Hargrove didn't look up from his phone. His index finger swiped across the screen with deliberate indifference. Did I ask for your assessment, sweetheart? She took half a step closer. The chart was still extended. His numbers indicate. Hargrove's hand moved like a snake striking. He didn't hit her. He hit the chart. His palm connected with the papers and sent them flying across the cafeteria tile in a shower of white, vitals, intake forms, physician notes, all of it cascading like snow across the floor. The sound was sharp, final. Rubber soles on tile. Papers skittering. Then silence. The silence spread through the cafeteria like spilled water finding all the low places. Every conversation stopped. Residents stared. Nurses gripped their trays tighter. Hargrove didn't even look at her. He just turned his attention back to his phone as if the interaction was already completed, as if she was already gone. Pick that up, sweetheart. That's more your speed than diagnostics. Danielle knelt slowly. Her hands were steady as she gathered the scattered papers. She'd learned in Tikrit that tears in the moment were information. They meant you were still attached to the outcome, still hoping the world worked according to rules. She let the tear come, let it move down her cheek, and didn't wipe it until she was standing again. When she did wipe it, she was looking directly into Hargrove's eyes. The room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum overhead, that electrical buzz that never quite stopped. One day you'll need someone like me, and I'll still show up. She walked away as whispers erupted behind her like sparked flint. She didn't hear what they said. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of her jacket lining where the unit patch was sewn, the 1st Marine Division insignia she'd carried through Tikrit, the last thing connecting her to the woman she used to be. Her hands didn't shake until she was in the stairwell. Then they shook for 7 minutes solid. Friday evening arrived with the weight of accumulated exhaustion. The ICU seemed smaller on nights like this, the walls closer, the ventilators breathing in a staggered chorus that made her think of machines designed by people who had never actually heard a human die. Danielle was adjusting Sergeant Major Kellerman's for running it through a secondary line for the antibiotics, careful with the timing because she'd seen what sepsis did to men, had held it at bay in burning tents with nothing but determination and intravenous fluids. The Sergeant Major. The man who had written the letter that changed everything for her son Marcus. She'd read it once, Marcus leaving it on the kitchen table in their Phoenix apartment. Your son demonstrates the qualities we look for in the Marines. Leadership. Courage. Integrity. Danielle had felt something crack in her ribs reading those words, knowing what leadership and courage and integrity actually cost, what they extracted from the people who possessed them. She didn't blame the Sergeant Major for this. She blamed the system that convinced young men their sacrifice was noble, their deaths meaningful. But she'd never told Marcus any of this. She'd let him enlist while she worked retail in Phoenix, a carefully constructed fiction that protected him from knowing his mother's hands had held more death than any 23-year-old should ever witness. Dr. Hargrove appeared in the ICU doorway with 3 residents trailing him like remoras following a shark. His presence seemed to alter the air pressure in the room. She'd felt this before, in the presence of men who'd been told their entire lives that they were exceptional. He walked toward Kellerman's bed with the kind of casual authority that came from never having his decisions questioned. Step back, sweetheart, this one needs actual expertise. He physically moved her aside with a movement that was almost gentle, almost paternal. Almost insulting enough to be violence. You civilian nurses, you see the uniform and think you understand combat casualties. Think you understand what real medicine looks like under pressure. You don't. He pulled up Kellerman's chart on the wall-mounted monitor, his residents gathering around him like students at an altar. Danielle's jaw tightened. She took one measured breath. One tear escaped. She didn't understand why her body did this anymore, why her training to compartmentalize had been overridden by these involuntary responses. She wiped it without looking away from Hargrove. When she spoke, her voice had shifted. It carried the weight of someone speaking from experience rather than observation. Understanding and experience aren't the same thing, Doctor. Hargrove turned to his residents with a smile that was meant to include them in something. See that? Think she's profound. That's what 7 years of critical care experience looks like when you're pretending to be modest. He turned a shoulder toward her, dismissing her from the conversation entirely. The problem with floor nurses is they mistake pattern recognition for expertise. This man here, he gestured at Kellerman's unconscious form, has thoracic injuries that require surgical assessment. Not vital sign reading. Not chart interpretation. Assessment. The residents laughed obediently, the laugh of people still convinced that hierarchy determined competence. Danielle said nothing more. She had learned in Tikrit that silence was a more powerful weapon than argument. She returned to her work on the medication cart, checking and rechecking dosages with the meticulous attention of someone who understood that a single error could mean someone didn't wake up. At 20:47 hours, Sergeant Major Kellerman's monitor began to chirp. A soft sound at first, easy to miss if you weren't listening. But Danielle was always listening. At 20:48, she recognized the pattern. At 20:49, she was moving toward his bed. At 20:50, she was reading the clinical picture in the presentation: trachea deviated right, jugular veins distended, oxygen saturation plummeting from 94% to 86% in less than 30 seconds. Tension pneumothorax. His lung was collapsing, and with every breath, it was getting worse. She hit the code button with the heel of her palm and reached for the phone to page the on-call surgeon. The system connected. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had done this before, in conditions so much worse that this felt almost routine. Trauma attending, stat. Tension pneumothorax, ICU bed 7. The operator acknowledged. She waited. 60 seconds. 2 minutes elapsed. Kellerman's oxygen saturation was at 78%. His lips were beginning to show cyanosis, that telltale blue that meant his blood was losing oxygen faster than his lungs could replace it. She paged again. 3 minutes. The night supervisor appeared beside her. Her name was Carmen, and she had worked ICU for 5 years, which meant she had the confidence of someone who knew just enough to be dangerous. "Where's Hargrove?" she asked. No answer, Danielle said. She was already pulling on gloves with one smooth motion, already prepping the second intercostal space with sterile alcohol, already holding the 14-gauge angiocath needle like she'd held it 1,000 times before. Because she had. Just not in this hospital. For minutes. "Danielle, you can't. You're not authorized for this procedure. You're a staff nurse, not." 5 minutes. Danielle's hand stopped shaking. Something shifted in her body, a settling, like a door closing on her civilian identity and another door opening on the person she'd been for 12 years before she'd tried to be someone else. Muscle memory took over. The kind of muscle memory that didn't care about credentials or hierarchy or what was written in anyone's personnel file. The kind of muscle memory that only cared about the fact that the man in front of her was a Marine, and he was dying, and she was the only one present who could stop it. 6 minutes. She found the 5th intercostal space, mid-axillary line, marked the spot with her gloved index finger. The needle went in with the precise angle of someone who had practiced this in the dark, in the sand, in field hospitals where the smell of diesel fuel and blood mixed into something that became, over time, the smell of keeping people alive. 7 minutes. The hiss. That sound of air escaping, the sound of pressure releasing, the sound of physics becoming mercy. Kellerman's oxygen saturation climbed immediately. 78% to 84% to 91%. His color returned. His chest began to rise and fall with the rhythm of a man whose lung was re-expanding, whose blood was finding oxygen again, whose body was being given a second chance. She held the catheter steady, breathing controlled, as Carmen stared at her with an expression that moved through shock into something like understanding. "How did you?" At 8 minutes and 30 seconds, Dr. Hargrove walked into the ICU. He smelled like bourbon and institutional cologne, like a man who had been drinking in his office instead of answering pages. He saw Kellerman stable. He saw the catheter secured in place. He saw Danielle's rock-steady hands holding the lifeline, her eyes focused on her patient like the rest of the world didn't exist. His face hardened into something closer to stone. He walked toward her slowly, each footstep deliberate, the kind of walk a man takes when he's trying to decide if what he's seeing is real. When he spoke, his voice was low and precise, the voice of a man who understood that volume was no longer a weapon that would work here. "My office. Tomorrow. Bring your badge." He turned and walked away, and Danielle realized in that moment that everything she'd built in the last 6 months, the invisibility, the civilian identity, the careful fiction that she was just another night nurse in a city full of them, had come apart in the space of time it took to save a Marine's life. The diesel generator rumbled to life outside the ICU at 0200 hours Saturday morning, and Danielle's hands betrayed her. The tremor started in her fingers as she checked Kellerman's vitals, a small shake she could hide by gripping the clipboard tighter. That sound. That exact pitch and mechanical wheeze, identical to the generators at FOB Shank in Tikrit, the ones that had powered the field hospital where everything broke inside her. She forced herself to breathe through it. The monitors showed his oxygen saturation holding steady at 94%. His chest rose and fell in rhythm with the ventilator. For now, he was stable. For now. She was charting when his O2 dropped. 92. 90. The number fell like a stone down a well. His respiratory rate climbed, 26, 28, 30, and his chest wall showed the telltale asymmetry she'd seen 1,000 times before. One side moving. The other side trapped. The monitors began their frantic conversation with each other, alarm tones stacking like a choir of panic. Tension pneumothorax. His right lung had collapsed, and the trapped air was compressing his heart. Pressure building with every breath. Seconds counted now in diminishing fractions. Danielle moved. Not panicked. Not rushed. The precision of someone whose muscle memory had been forged in a trauma bay that had treated 214 casualties in a single month. Her voice came out steady. "I need a 14-gauge needle. Midclavicular line, second intercostal space. Now." The resident froze. She didn't wait. She was already prepping the site with betadine swabs, her hands moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had done this under fire, under rain, under the weight of dying men she couldn't save. The tremor was gone. Purpose burned it away. "Dr. Hargrove," she said into her pager. "Stat tension pneumothorax, Sergeant Major Kellerman, ICU Bay 4. She waited. The resident was still frozen. Danielle didn't acknowledge him. She didn't have time for paralysis. Kellerman's oxygen was at 84% now. His blood pressure sliding downward like a car losing its brakes on a mountain road. She could hear the whistle of air in his right chest, the pressure building against his mediastinum, compressing the vena cava. Every second he didn't decompress was a second closer to cardiac arrest. His heart rate was 142 and climbing. Tachycardic. Desperate. No response from Hargrove. She paged again. Stat multiple times. Her fingers worked the needle into position at the second rib, sliding it horizontally through the intercostal muscles, feeling for that specific give in the resistance, there, the pleural space opening like a door. She advanced the catheter. The hiss of air escaping made the surgical resident gasp. That sound was life returning. That was the pneumothorax bleeding out into the room instead of into Kellerman's chest. Oxygen climbing. 88. 92. 96. Stable. Hargrove didn't arrive for 8 minutes. When he did, Kellerman was breathing easier, the monitors showing normal sinus rhythm, the crisis already managed. Danielle had taped the catheter in place, ordered a chest X-ray, documented everything in the medical record with the precision of someone who knew exactly which details mattered. She stepped back from the bed. Made herself small. Made herself disappear. Hargrove's eyes moved from the stable patient to the needle secured in Kellerman's chest to Danielle standing in the corner, and something in his face changed. The arrogance shifted. Calcified. Became something colder. "You performed an emergency procedure," he said. "Not a question." Outside your scope of practice. He looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of furniture that has suddenly learned to speak. He didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked toward the exit, already talking into his phone before he cleared the ICU doors. Get me the patient's full file. And contact risk management. We may have a liability issue. The morning came grey and cold. Danielle sat in her apartment in the dim hours before dawn, hands wrapped around a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, touching the faded unit patch she'd sewn into the lining of her jacket 3 years ago, the 1st Marine Division insignia, faded from 8 months in desert sun and blood and diesel exhaust. She'd carried it from one identity to another. She'd thought that was enough. That if she was careful enough, invisible enough, obedient enough, the past would stay buried. Saturday morning brought the first investigator. A woman in a grey suit carrying a leather folder thick as a brick. We need your personnel file. Your application materials. Your credentials. And we'll need to audit your medication logs from the last 6 months. Danielle handed over everything. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. Composure was all she had now, and she used it like a shield. Hargrove had made his calls. She heard about them later from Torres, the IT specialist in the basement who worked night shifts and knew things. Hargrove's brother-in-law controlled 3 board members through a network of referrals and favors and the kind of debt that flows between powerful men. One phone call to the director of nursing, I've had concerns about this nurse's qualifications. Her references are inconsistent. I think we need a formal review. Another call to her previous employers, now defunct military clinics, now impossible to reach. The inconsistencies Hargrove manufactured appeared in the investigator's report like fingerprints at a crime scene. The termination letter arrived Monday morning. Standard format. Professional language. Detached. It cited policy violations for practicing outside her licensure, unauthorized medication administration, insubordination, failure to follow chain of command. Every charge was fabricated. Every charge had been crafted by someone who understood hospital law the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Effective end of week. Final shift, Friday, 2300 to 0700 hours. She sat in the staff bathroom when she read it, the one on the 3rd floor that nobody used, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped wasps. Her hands were shaking now. Not from fear. From rage. From the understanding that she had saved a Marine's life, and in doing so, had revealed herself to a man who had learned her entire value in a moment and decided that her competence was a threat worth destroying. She pulled the unit patch from her jacket lining, held it in her palm. The fabric was thin now, worn soft from 3 years of carrying it against her body, pressed against her heart. The emblem was almost invisible. Almost gone. Almost forgotten. Almost. But that wasn't the worst part. Saturday morning came with the kind of silence that precedes a detonation. Danielle was changing out of her scrubs in the locker room when Dr. Hargrove appeared in the doorway, his presence making the air pressure change. He wasn't loud. That was what made him dangerous. His voice came out smooth as oil on water, my office. Now. She followed him through the empty corridors of Sacred Heart. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in that peculiar hospital pallor, nothing looked alive under them. Hargrove's office was exactly what she'd expected. Mahogany desk. Medical journals stacked with theatrical precision. A framed photo of him shaking hands with someone in a suit she didn't recognize. Power walls. The architecture of a man who needed everyone to know he mattered. He closed the door. Didn't offer her a seat. That performance last night was your last mistake, he said, moving behind the desk like a predator circling wounded prey. You think you're clever. You think that little medical stunt buys you something. It doesn't. His fingers drummed the desktop. 1, 2, 3. I've been in this profession for 23 years. I have 4 board members on speed dial. I have connections at every accreditation body between here and Austin. You have 6 months of a fake employment history and hands that shake under pressure. Danielle didn't correct him. Her hands weren't shaking. But she understood what he was doing. He was painting the picture for himself. He was already writing the ending. By Monday, Hargrove continued, I will have called every reference on your application. I will have discovered inconsistencies. And I will have activated an external audit of every single medication you've touched since you walked through those doors. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd never been told no and couldn't comprehend why anyone would try. You'll be terminated for cause before your next shift. And when you apply anywhere else in this state, they'll find what I'm about to plant. You'll be unemployable, Danielle. You'll be radioactive. The door opened behind her. He'd summoned security before she even arrived. That told her everything she needed to know about his confidence. She stood, turned, and walked past them without a word. Behind her, she heard Hargrove's voice, clean her access by 1500 hours. She's done. The inconsistencies started appearing by Sunday morning. A recruiter called her personal number asking about a reference from a Phoenix medical staffing company that had gone defunct in 2019. Her former address in Arizona didn't match the one on her Sacred Heart application. The dates on her certifications overlapped in ways that would raise flags with anyone who knew what they were looking for. Hargrove wasn't being subtle. He was being surgical. He didn't need to frame her for something complicated. He just needed to make her paperwork look like the work of someone who was running from something. An investigator arrived Monday afternoon. His name was Carlisle. He carried a leather briefcase and the practiced expression of a man who'd spent 15 years rooting through other people's lives. He set up in the hospital administrator's office and started pulling records. Every medication Danielle had signed out. Every dose. Every patient. Every 4 push of epinephrine and bag of normal saline. 6 months of work. 217 shifts. Thousands of transactions that had seemed routine the moment they happened. We're conducting a routine audit, the administrator told her on Monday evening when they finally pulled her in. The administrator was a woman named Chen who'd always been cordial to Danielle. Now she couldn't quite meet her eyes. Nothing to worry about. Just a formality. We do these occasionally. They didn't do these occasionally. By Tuesday afternoon, the termination letter appeared in her personnel file. It was 3 pages. Dense. Cited policy violations she didn't recognize. Medication discrepancies that turned out to be system errors, not crimes. Documentation gaps that were the hospital's fault, not hers. But the tone was clear, we have decided you are not who you said you were, and that is enough. They walked her to her locker at 1,600 hours. She gathered her belongings into a cardboard box. A stethoscope she'd bought with her own money. A pair of trauma shears she'd carried through 5 cities. A water bottle. The things you accumulate when you're trying to be invisible. Security stood nearby, not threatening but present. A witness. An escort. The physical representation of how completely she'd been erased. The worst part wasn't the firing. It was that she'd let it happen. She'd stayed quiet. She'd been professional. She'd swallowed every insult and performed every correction with a kind of meek precision that people like Hargrove interpreted as weakness. She'd protected her son's career and hidden her own, and the moment she'd tried to save a life, the moment she'd done the one thing she was actually trained for, the house of cards had collapsed exactly as designed. 3 days later, she sat in a waiting room at the Houston VA hospital. The intake form asked about her service in ways that felt like they were digging past skin. Asked for dates. Asked for unit designations. Asked for discharge status. Around her, veterans in various states of recovery occupied plastic chairs that had been engineered for discomfort. Some had prosthetics. Some had the 1,000-yard stare of people whose injuries were internal. One man, probably 70, held a purple ribbon in his lap like it was a holy object. Nobody talked. Nobody looked at each other. This was what invisibility looked like after you'd stopped working for it. Her jacket was draped over the back of her chair. Inside the lining, sewn into the pocket where it had lived for 18 years, was the faded unit patch. 1st Marine Division. The fabric was nearly translucent from age. The edges were fraying. She'd paid a tailor in San Diego to weave it into her jacket lining the week after she'd left active duty. A memorial to the woman she'd been. A denial of the woman she'd become. The woman who stayed in the shadows. The woman who let a man like Hargrove erase her with paperwork and phone calls and the simple machinery of institutional power. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled it out. The patch felt fragile in her hands, like it might disintegrate if she held it too long. The ink on the emblem was still visible, the Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor in faded red and gold. She stared at it while the intake form sat blank on her lap. Name. Rank. Service branch. Period of service. Discharge status. All the questions asking her to acknowledge who she'd been, knowing she'd spent the last 6 months denying it. A veteran in the next chair glanced over. His uniform jacket hung loose on his frame, someone who'd lost weight or lost time or both. Semper Fi, he asked, nodding at the patch. She didn't answer. She carefully folded the patch and placed it back inside her jacket lining. Then she picked up the pen and began to fill out the form. Her handwriting was steady. Whatever else had broken inside her, whatever had bent under the weight of staying small and quiet and invisible, her hand was still steady. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was tell the truth about who you were. But sometimes the most necessary thing was exactly the same. The Iraqi translator arrived at 1,447 hours pushing a new patient on a gurney, his eye scanning the trauma unit with the practiced wariness of someone who'd learned to read rooms the way soldiers read terrain. He was thin, weathered, maybe 50, with a scar that split his left eyebrow. He stopped. Stopped cold. His gaze locked on Danielle at the Central Station reviewing labs, and his hand went slack on the stretcher rail. "You," he said. His English fractured but deliberate. "You are the devil nurse. From Tikrit." The entire unit felt the shift. Nurses looked up. Residents paused. Danielle's pen didn't stop moving across the chart. She finished the notation before turning. "I pull many people from fire," she said quietly. The translator stepped closer, abandoning his patient to a resident. "No. No, you pull me. Field hospital burning. American bombs, no, our bombs, our war, but the building burning, and I am under steel beam, and you come. You sing." He was trembling now. "You sing while you work. I think I am dead and you are angel. But you are devil nurse. This is what they call you. The devil nurse who will not leave." Danielle's composure held like reinforced concrete. "That was a long time ago." "Not so long. 12 years. 12 years I remember your hands." He looked at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time since Tikrit. "Your hands save me. And I live." He turned back to his patient. The unit resumed its work, but the rhythm had changed. The air itself felt charged, like the moment before a defibrillator fires. The door to the trauma unit swung open at 1,503 hours. A Marine in dress blue stood framed in the doorway, shoulders squared, eyes moving across the space with the precision of someone trained to identify threats and assets. "Marcus." Her son. Danielle's hand steadied on the chart in front of her, a small, invisible gesture that meant everything to anyone who understood restraint. Marcus approached the Central Station, his dress uniform immaculate, the creases sharp enough to draw blood. Other staff members glanced at him, then at Danielle, then away. Marcus came to a stop 3 feet from her station. His voice was formal. Precise. Not the voice of a son, but of a physician assistant addressing a superior officer. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Ross." The words hung like ordnance in still air. Danielle looked up from her charts. Their eyes met, and in that moment, every person in the trauma unit understood that something buried and enormous had just surfaced. "Son," Danielle said. "Nothing more." Marcus nodded once, sharp as a salute. "Commander Bradley is in the waiting area. He asked me to bring you." He paused. "He said you'd know why." Danielle set down her pen. Stood. Walked toward the waiting area without looking back at her son, knowing that the next word spoken in that room would rewrite everything Hargrove had spent 6 months trying to destroy. Commander Bradley stood when she entered. He was broad-shouldered, grey at the temples, carrying himself with the particular authority of a man who'd made decisions in the dark that other people would never understand. "SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon." His presence made the air pressure change. "Senior Chief," he said. "Not a question." Danielle extended her hand. "Commander." His grip was measured. "Your personnel file arrived at JSOC 48 hours ago." Redacted initial report from the Houston VA, transmitted by a hospital administrator who decided transparency was worth more than protecting one physician's reputation. He released her hand. "I've been authorized to read your commendations into the record. Here. Now." He pulled a folder from inside his dress uniform jacket. The leather was worn soft. Bronze Star. "For coordination of casualty evacuation under sustained RPG fire, Fallujah, March 2008. He paused. Danielle's face showed nothing. "Silver Star. For establishing field triage protocols that reduced casualty mortality by 14% across 3 forward operating bases, Sanjin Valley, August 2009 through November 2010. Another pause. The waiting room had gone quiet. A nurse walked past slowly, deliberately not making eye contact. Navy and Marine Corps Medal. For conducting emergency surgery on 17 coalition personnel in a burning field hospital, Tikrit, May 2011, without anesthesia support, refusing evacuation until the final casualty was stabilized. Bradley's voice didn't waver. 2 purple hearts. He closed the folder. And the recommendation, still pending final Pentagon review, for a Commendation Medal recognizing service that saved an estimated 4,847 military and civilian lives across 31 months of active deployment. Danielle's hands remained at her sides. Her breathing steady. The composure of someone who'd held that kind of weight before and knew how to distribute it across bone and muscle and will. "Any of that ring a bell, Senior Chief?" Dr. Hargrove was standing in the trauma unit hallway. Danielle saw him before she fully re-entered the space. He'd followed, or perhaps he'd been there the entire time, a vulture drawn by the electricity of unraveling plans. His face was draining color in real time. The coffee cup in his hand tilted. Danielle watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the understanding that every destruction he'd orchestrated, every phone call made in private, every fabrication lodged with the investigation board, was now standing in a trauma unit in front of a Navy SEAL commander in full dress uniform. His hand moved toward his pocket. His phone. Danielle's training caught the motion before his fingers completed it. She knew what came next: damage control. Calls to allies. Story revision. The desperate mechanical responses of a man who'd confused arrogance with untouchability. The waiting room door opened again. Torres stepped through. The hospital IT specialist was wearing his Marine veteran baseball cap, the one with the faded emblem from his time with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. He looked directly at Hargrove. "My office is done with you. Document Hospital Legal is done with you. State Medical Board just received my report on the deletion attempts, the fabricated investigator contact, the evidence tampering." Torres moved into the trauma unit with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd already won. "Every file you tried to destroy in the last 6 hours, I've got copies. 7 times you attempted unauthorized access to the security system. 17 instances of attempted evidence deletion. And the fun part." He smiled without warmth. "Your phone logs. You called the external investigator at 0847 this morning and told them Senior Chief Ross's credentials were falsified. But her credentials aren't falsified. And you knew that. Which makes that conversation fraud. Which makes this a legal matter now, not an HR matter. Hargrove's mouth opened. No sound came out. His coffee cup dropped. It shattered on the linoleum floor, the brown liquid spreading like a bloodstain. The administrator's in his office waiting for you, Torres continued. So is hospital legal. And a representative from the state medical board. They're going to walk you through your options. Resignation with cause versus formal investigation. Torres touched the brim of his baseball cap. Semper Fi, Senior Chief. The administrator's office, 1 hour later. Danielle sat in the leather chair across from the desk while 3 people reviewed video. The cafeteria. The slap of the chart hitting the floor. Hargrove's voice, dripping, "Pick that up, sweetheart." The staff meeting footage. The public bet. The laughter that had followed her out of that room like a physical weight. The ICU corridor. Step back, sweetheart, this one needs actual expertise. 3 times. 3 separate documented instances of degradation conducted in front of witnesses. The administrator set down his pen. His resignation was submitted 37 minutes ago. Effective immediately. However, the State Medical Board is proceeding with a formal investigation regarding evidence tampering and professional conduct violations. That will take approximately 4 months. He looked at Danielle directly. We're offering you reinstatement with full back pay, retroactive to your termination date. We're also offering you the director position for the trauma unit, if you want it. Danielle took one measured breath. I want it. The administrator nodded once. Welcome back, Senior Chief. He extended his hand. Danielle shook it. Her grip was steady as a surgical laser. 6 months later, Danielle walked through the trauma unit wearing scrubs with director embroidered on the pocket in navy thread. The unit hummed with the practiced rhythm of people who'd learned to trust their leader. She stopped at the central nurses' station. On the wall behind her desk hung a shadow box. Inside, the faded 1st Marine Division unit patch, preserved in archival glass. 2 Silver Star citations. 1 Navy and Marine Corps medal. And a photograph, Sergeant Major Kellerman in dress uniform, recovered and standing, rendering a formal salute toward a Navy medic in desert camouflage 12 years younger, saluting back. Danielle, before the breaking, before the hiding, before she learned that showing up was a form of courage nobody talked about. Marcus worked 3 floors down as a physician assistant now, having transferred to be near his mother. Samir, the translator, coordinated the refugee medical assistance program that Danielle had helped establish. Torres ran hospital IT security and led a new veteran hiring initiative that was already training 14 former military personnel for healthcare roles. Commander Bradley had sent a bronze plaque, the Devil Nurse, still saving lives. A young nurse approached nervously at 1,630 hours. There's someone in the lobby. A former staff member. He's asking to see you. Danielle set down her pen. She recognized the name before the nurse spoke it. Dr. Hargrove. She stood. Walked to the lobby. He was wearing a polo shirt with Houston Community College embroidered on it. Minimum wage. CPR instruction. He looked a decade older. His posture had collapsed inward. He struggled with the words. I needed to say. Danielle took one measured breath. No trembling. No tears. The composure of someone who'd held the worst and learned to stand in it. You're here for the community college training access. Her voice was professional. Distant. 3rd floor, room 302. They're expecting you. She turned to leave. Wait. Hargrove's voice cracked. I'm sorry. For all of it. Danielle paused. Didn't turn around. Some people see weakness where there's strength. Some people see threats where there's competence. You saw what you needed to see to feel powerful. She walked back to the trauma unit. The rotor wash of a distant helicopter rattled the windows. Life continued. Heroes showed up. That's all they ever did. Danielle at the nurse's station at 2,140 hours, reviewing patient charts in the quiet that falls after the worst cases are stabilized or resolved. A medical student approached. Young. Earnest. Director Ross, is it true you were in the military? Danielle touched the shadow box on the wall. Her fingers traced the unit patch, 1st Marine Division, faded by Tikrit sun, carried through hell in a jacket lining. A long time ago. Different person. The student persisted. They say you're a legend. Danielle smiled slightly. The kind of smile that comes from having survived things that break lesser people. Legends are for stories. I just showed up when nobody else would. She returned to the charts. The unit around her continued its work, 4s running, monitors beeping their steady rhythm, the particular music of people saving lives in the dark. This is what redemption looked like. Not applause. Not vindication. Just showing up again. Just letting people see who you actually were. Just standing in the light after so long in shadow. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear scrubs. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see your scars. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated and proven them wrong, subscribe for more stories about the quiet warriors among us. Like this video. Comment, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were dead wrong? And let us know, would you have stayed, like Danielle did?